What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Emily Hughes. Emily is an American former figure skater and Olympian. She competed at the 2006 Winter Olympics and then was a 2007 U.S. national silver medalist. After retiring from figure skating, Emily attended a pretty good school called Harvard University and earned her bachelor's degree in sociology. Her professional career began as a consultant at Deloitte, and after Deloitte, she worked at a handful of reputable companies, including Google, Johnson & Johnson, where she was the director of strategy and operations in the health tech division, and Meta, where she spent time in sports league partnerships and product marketing. Now, Emily works as a business lead at Grandstand, a sports tech startup that is connecting athletes and fans in a more meaningful way. Emily, it is so great to have you on She Leads. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Carly. It's so great to be here.
Of course. So first, set the scene for us. Where are you in the world? I love your background. It looks so professional. So tell me a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you. Newly redecorated office space. I'm in New York. Grew up in New York, spent a lot of time in San Francisco, and made my way back to New York a couple of years ago.
All right. So Emily, as you know, I love to start off, and I think with your story particularly, this is even more interesting, at least to me. But tell me a little bit about your childhood, and especially you come from a big family. You're the fifth of six kids, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And tell me a little bit, what did that childhood look like? What kind of kid were you?
As you mentioned, big family, the fifth of six. All of us skated or played hockey. My dad is Canadian and grew up playing hockey where they would freeze the backyard and everyone would play hockey outside in the winter. For him, it was just a family pastime. Everyone skated, and it was kind of something that you did as a family. And so he brought that to our family. But you know what? We all loved it. And so we all skated or played hockey at some point of our lives. And it's fun as like a family event.
And how old were you when you first put on skates? Do you remember that moment?
I was about 3 when I started skating, which is very young. And so my older sister, Sarah, is 4 years older. And the story my mom likes to tell is that she would take Sarah to the rink and I would be there with her. And she said that I used to run around a lot. And so she just put me on the ice so that she could contain it and watch me in one place. And so I started skating at a young age at 3.
That's honestly a very common reason for parents to put their kids in sports. It's just like, get out all your energy. We're already bringing another sibling in. So you just have to be thrown into it. So I love it. And was it almost like love at first skate, if you will? Like, did you already have that passion very early on?
I did love it at a young age. I loved competing, especially even at a young age. I mean, it was that love for the sport and the love for competing and the love for it that really drove me through to all those years of practice and competition.
Yeah. And the other aspect is growing up, one, with many siblings, 2, we'll get into this, but Sarah was also an Olympian. So I want to know, what was the parenting style, right? Having 2 of their kids. Did any other kids, by the way, go to the Olympics? Casual question.
Not the Olympics, but your brothers played hockey in college, and other sisters skated, and so a lot of skating and hockey.
And was there this very natural competitiveness throughout your childhood amongst the siblings?
I don't know if it was a natural competitiveness. Sarah and I never competed against each other. There's a 4 years age gap, and so right as she was kind of retiring, I was getting to that senior level. So it was not so much a competitive feeling, but more of a supportive, because everyone kind of know, you're going to the rink, you kind of know like what the other siblings are doing. And so I would say more supportive than competitive.
So take me back to around 2002. You were only 13 years old, but already you were competing at the national level. So there was almost this, maybe a gap for how many months, but you got last at nationals while Sarah was in the Olympics in 2002. Just walk me through that process and how did that almost change your mindset for your future in figure skating?
So I had qualified, I was a junior level. So in skating, there's the junior level and then the senior level is the highest level. And so I had qualified as a junior. It was my first nationals. I remember it was LA, skating at the then Staples Center. And it was a really big deal for me. And then that was January. And in February, I watched my sister win the Olympics in Salt Lake City. And that was just, it was pretty surreal. Our whole family was there. And we were sitting as high as you can get in the arena, where everyone kind of looked like little ants on the ice. But I still remember she had skated this amazing performance. And then it really wasn't until the last skater finished where we didn't know what the result was going to be. And I remember all of us are just watching, waiting for the results, still silence. And then all of a sudden the results came up and you could it was a blur. We were jumping and cheering. And it was, like I said, kind of a surreal moment where I grew up with her, skate with her, and then watched her win the Olympics. And for me, that was the moment of, I want to do that. And I can do that. She did it. I want to do it. And that was really a big changing point. I was only 13, but that was a big changing point for me of just firsthand having that experience and then thinking, well, I want to do that too. And that was a really big turning point for me.
Ultimately, and I mentioned it in the intro, so spoiler, you end up going to the Olympics in 2006. So you trained for essentially the next 4 years after seeing your sister win the gold. And mind you, this was around the same time of the core years of high school, 13 to 17 years old. So I want to know, aside from figure skating, were you able to actually have that typical high school or finding that social life? What was that dynamic looking like?
I skated a lot and I traveled a lot for skating and I competed a lot. I think before college, I had competed all over the world, Russia, China, different countries in Europe, Canada, probably a bit different than a typical high school experience. But I was in public school. That was really important to my parents. My dad used to say, you're a student athlete, not an athlete student, and tried to find a balance between trying to finish homework and then going to compete at a very high level in figure skating. For me, it was really great to have that balance of school and skating. And looking back, I'm so glad my parents really were focused on, staying in school and also giving us this amazing opportunity. I think you had mentioned before, how did my parents juggle it all, get us to the rink and all different rinks for different kids. And my brothers were on different hockey teams. But yeah, I feel very fortunate that I was able to have the opportunity to skate and to compete and to get lessons and all that stuff. And also try to balance it with school, because that was really important to continue my education. But on the social side, probably not the typical high school social experience.
Because also, like you said, you're traveling a ton, you're missing a lot of school days. How did you maintain that rigor academically to ultimately, you end up going to Harvard, right? And it's an incredible, prestigious school. And how was that when you think about it now, was that a hard balance to strike, or it was almost actually pretty natural to you? You were a good student naturally.
I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was something that I really wanted to do. The school really worked with us with the schedule, but because we were putting the time and effort into our studies. And so it was had to keep up a good GPA and do well in school to continue to be able to do both. I always had the big backpack and going to the rink with all my books and traveling across wherever with all these textbooks, and still remember trying to do homework in the car. That is one thing, as I look back at my career as an athlete, thinking about so many things that I did or learned or kind of had experiences of, really have translated beyond the ice. And that's definitely one of them, around trying to figure out a balance with the things you want to be doing. And at that point, it was skating at a very high level and going to high school.
And we'll talk about it, but that balance naturally comes in. You're a mom of a 1.5-year-old, all throughout life, I feel like we're just met with different things we have to quote unquote balance. And I'm sure like those lessons that you learn probably trickle through. So anyway, Emily, I want to talk about that moment where you find out that you're going to the Olympics. You fulfilled that dream of saying, you know what, I made it. What was that like? And walk me through that process.
When the team was named for the '06 Olympics, I was on an alternate. And so I wasn't on the team to begin with. And I was named to the world team, and the world championships were going to be in March, and the Olympics are in February. And so I was still training because I had a big event. I had never been to a world championship. So for me, that was still a really big accomplishment. And it wasn't until the day after the opening ceremony that I got a call saying, would you like to represent the US at the Olympics? And I was at home on Long Island.
Was this after the opening ceremony in the Olympics?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So it was, luckily the women's skating event is at the end of the Olympics. And so I had a few days to get back and get things together, and then fly over there post opening ceremony. Olympics already going on. I had a couple days in Italy and then competed.
Being called as an alternate, and I've talked to other athletes who had that same experience, whether it's for a World Cup team, Olympics, and excuse my language, but it's an absolute mind fuck. And it's really hard to deal with because it's almost like you were so close, but you didn't get it. And then you also have to be kind of mentally ready to be called at any moment. What was that like for you? How did you deal with that first initial call?
In figure skating, they don't send the alternate. So I was home. So I wasn't with the team. I wasn't out in Italy. And I mean, I don't know a better way to say it than surreal. It was years of training and this ultimate dream/goal, dream which turned into a goal of wanting to be an Olympian and compete in the Olympics. And then to get a phone call while we're at dinner in my hometown, it was just like nothing I ever could have imagined. And then going over there and like skating on Olympic ice is that was one of the moments where I kind of had to take a breath of, wow, I'm at the Olympics. And then you have to focus and say, all right, now I got to go compete.
From that part of being, an athlete at the highest level in your sport, the mental side of the game is so important.
Yeah.
And so I would love to know, take me back to those moments. What were some tips, tricks, things that you implemented in your own personal game that you use that you actually attribute a lot of success to, or at least like it really helped you throughout it?
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I really think back about is what my mindset was and what my mindset is. And so going back to when we're talking about 2002, when I got last place, the next year I got second or third to last or something like that. So I didn't quite go up very far. And I remember meeting my parents outside the arena, and I think they were thinking of, we're gonna have to console her. Like I didn't do that well, and I ran out of the arena screaming, "I didn't get last place!" And and so having that, I mean, that's just one example, but that mindset of I didn't get last place is really, I feel like, what helped me through times when things just don't go your way, which as an athlete is many, many times, or many obstacles you have to overcome. And so mindset and having that, being able to find that silver lining or just to kind of shift your mindset is huge. And even now, post-competitive career, post-athlete career, just in everyday life, is there sometimes where you can shift your mindset and really change things?
I love that. And I think since 2006 to today, there've been a complete increase in the discourse, at least, of mental health for sports, whether it's sports psychologists, mental health coach, like whatever it may be. And I'm wondering, what was it like back then? Did you use other resources? Did you lean on your parents and their advice, or was it more of like an insular process for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, because things have definitely changed a lot in every aspect of life since 2006. Even just thinking like social media wasn't a thing. A lot of things have changed since I competed. As a figure skater, it's a small skating world. And I did rely on, my parents were very, very supportive. My coach was very supportive, and kind of had like a team around me, even though it is an individual sport. And then even like the competitors, in the moment you're competing, but you're competing against the same people over and over. And so even at the time, my biggest competitor, I fast forward a few years, like I was at her wedding, she was at my wedding. And so it's, I think things have changed a lot, but looking back, I had a good, really good support system around me.
When you think now, right, you're reflecting on this incredible Olympic experience that was in 2006. How do you view it now? Like, what feelings come up when you're reflecting on it?
That's a great question, because sometimes I was on the ice the other day and I had this moment of, how did I do this? How did I do triple jumps? Because I'm obviously not training anymore, but looking back, I think about just going from a dream to a goal to reality was just something I never really thought was going to happen. And it's wild to think it was 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Feels like a lifetime ago in some ways.
And walk me a little bit through after the Olympics. You end up getting 7th, right? Is that correct? Just from my research. So how was that feeling afterwards? Being like, okay, the, Grand Olympics, potentially, I know it's very similar to gymnastics, at least, where you don't necessarily have so many chances at the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about it a little bit more when you try for the 2010 team. But what was that feeling like when, the Olympics you kind of closed that chapter for at least that year?
Yeah. So, I went into the season thinking back, it was not the way I wanted to start the season. I actually had meningitis before the season, right before the season started. So the season did not even start the way that I wanted it to start or thought it would start. And so even from the beginning, there was this change of trying to be adaptable into I have a plan and a goal, but definitely to scrap this plan and try a new plan. And so to go from that, and then it was the first time I medaled at nationals. I got a bronze. And so all of these things, looking at from like a personal perspective, were huge milestones, let alone, kind of Olympic team separate, just thinking I qualified for senior nationals. I got a bronze medal. I had done a couple international competitions for the first time, and then was named to the world team for the first time. And so there were a lot of big personal accomplishments that year. And then to add on to it, being named to the Olympics as an alternate and then to the team was kind of like like I said before, it was a goal, but then it was kind of turned into a reality based on all this, all the work that I had done to get to that point. And so looking back on the year, it was, so motivating for the next year where, like you had said, I got national silver medal, but so many big, like personal accomplishments, even let alone the Olympics, but so many personal accomplishments in that year for me.
You know what I love hearing is I think it's really hard for an athlete to like stop and be very proud of themselves. And this probably translates to other industries as well. But I think your mindset throughout it all, like even, running to your parents and saying, I didn't get last, and then ended up, getting silver in 2007, like just seeing that trajectory and seeing your pride for yourself, I think is so incredible. Like it's very incredible to see, because I think people, you lose sight of that. You lose sight of enjoying the process and rather just maybe enjoying it after the fact.
It's so right. And I think there's also something to be said. This was 18 years ago. And so I have gone through I retired, and then it was, well, what's next? And that was a whole transition around, am I starting from nothing? Am I starting from zero? There's not just one path. There are millions of paths.
Totally.
So I do appreciate hearing you say that, but I do think it's also with time, I think I've also been able to reflect back. And now that I have a daughter of my own, just thinking about my experience with sports and as an athlete, thinking about it probably a little bit differently than I did a couple years after I retired.
Before we get into Harvard, you mentioned your daughter. She's 1.5 years old. So maybe, 1.5 more years until you put on your first skates until that age. So thinking about that aspect, are you gonna like force those skates onto her? Do you think the Olympic track is her journey, or how do you kind of reflect on that given your experience?
Yeah. So definitely not going to force skates on her. Just thinking back about sports in general, I've learned so much being an athlete. And even if I wasn't an Olympian, I still think there's just so much that I gained and learned just growing up, being in a sport, that I would love for her to find a sport that she loves and to be able to gain those lessons, gain that community, like, meet those friends. But I just think in general, like sports were such a big part of me and growing up and within my family that I would love her to be in a sport, and we'll see what she likes. That's kind of where I'm leaving it.
Emily, you mentioned a little bit about starting to now transition into what's life after figure skating. So I want to know, when did those initial maybe thoughts or conversations start to happen? And how did that almost make you feel back then?
It wasn't I wouldn't say there was a conscious of what is my life after skating. I think it was, I always had gone to school and skated, and then went into college and was skating. And I came to a point where in college where I was getting injured and I had to miss a national championships. And so decided that at that point was, I'm going to take some time off of college and then focus one more year on skating. And that was at the time such a big decision for me, because I had never not done both. And I had never really thought about taking time off of school. And looking back, I'm so glad I did, because there were just so many things that I think worked out for the right ways because I took time off. But that was for the 2010 year. It ended up being just one semester. But at that point, I knew this is the last season for me. Whatever happens here, I'm done with competing, which is kind of a little bit of a weird mindset to be in going into a season, but also in retrospect was a way that I could kind of finish on my terms. And I wanted to have that one more year. It was Olympic year. I want to try to make the Olympics and finish my competitive career a little bit more on, I know going into it, this is my last year. I mean, I didn't make the team. That was on a Saturday. And then on Monday, the spring semester started. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to school. And by that, Tuesday or Wednesday, I was back in class, which was a really fast transition to going from training, competing, trying to make the Olympics within a week to going to, okay, well, now I've retired and I'm back in school. It's been really interesting to talk to a lot of athletes around this kind of transition stage where there's a lot of ambiguity and there's a lot of unknown. And I think that a lot of athletes, every athlete has their own experience, their own story, but there's like so many threads that are tied to all these athletes' experiences going from competing to retiring and what's next.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this because, like you said, I think most athletes deal with this in some capacity. And I personally had it, after Stanford, played soccer there for 4 years. And then, that was it. Like I closed that chapter and I was personally excited to, go into the workforce. But again, it's that transition. So walk me a little bit through your personal transition. And if you ever had, the who am I, what is life beyond me and a figure skater? Yeah. Walk me through that a bit.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I went from I am a skater to, well, I was a skater, so what am I now? And it did take a really long time to kind of come back to I am a skater and skating is part of me. Skating is not just my identifier, but it's part of my identity. And that took a long time to come to separate my only identifier and my only identity as a skater to all these other things that I have in my life and that I do. It was junior year, and so a lot of my friends were applying to internships. And I remember one friend just saying, "Oh, just submit your resume," which I didn't really know what I wanted to do. There was a lot of I was coming back to school trying to figure out classes, and then I kind of took a second and thought, I don't have a resume. And then I thought, what do I put on a resume? I had some really nice friends sit with me and think through, well, how do I start to take my sports experience and actually put that on paper? And how do you translate those years of training, competing in front of thousands and millions of people? And then how do you put that on paper for some other career or some other job? And that is a really tough thing to do. I did create a resume. And so then started to just think about, well, what's next? And it was a lot of searching of what could I do? What am I interested in? And it did take a long time too to realize, like, definitely not starting from zero. And there are so many things, just experiences that I've had that translate into beyond the rink. And then so many skills that I've learned that translate beyond the rink. And so it was a time of how do I shape that and think about and translate that into, what I want to do next.
Yeah. I'm so happy you mentioned even the resume, right? Because one, you have so many skills that are beautiful in a work setting and like so great for a team environment and working hard. But again, it's not common to just, write them. Maybe it takes a little bit of room on a resume. Like there's not much that you can put on this, paper and one pager, if you will. But I want to know, going through that process as well, do you have advice for those who are going through a very similar process, whether it's in college, right after, their career in athletics, and they're going into the workforce after playing professionally in their sport? What advice do you have to almost advocate for yourself and like put yourself in the best light if you don't have, the experience that they're necessarily looking for?
Yeah, I think the big thing is you're not starting from zero. So thinking about what are the things that you've done as an athlete in the last year and last few years, whatever it may be, that would translate into, if you're looking for a new job or a new career, like what are those transferable skills? Because then you can start to shape your story and your narrative. And as an athlete, you're under high pressure situations. I remember I was sitting for an interview. It was on campus interview, and this person asked everyone the same question. And then she got to one and said, "How do you perform under pressure?" And then she started laughing. And I was thinking, I guess I should pick something different than competing in front of millions of people. And so it was just kind of thinking though around like, there are a lot of things that you've done that someone in a different industry or a different job might not initially understand the skills needed for that you could start to, how do you translate that into a different perspective? And so I think that's the second thing, is taking the skills you've learned and how do you kind of package them and put them together for that new thing.
Yeah, I love that. So I have a more niche question.
All right.
That initial job at Deloitte, or really any of the jobs that you went to, Google, Johnson & Johnson, we all have to do an intro at some point, who you are. Was that a hard process for you to describe who you are? And did you mention that you were an Olympian and a figure skater?
This is a great question, because when I first started working there, I did go through this phase of, how do I introduce myself? Do I kind of throw it in the beginning, at the end, just casual? Oh, I'll compete in the Olympics. It is funny because someone I had worked with at a job, it took that after months, they realized, "You're an Olympian? How did I not know this?" Because like I said before, it's not, it's part of my identity. It's not my only piece, my only identifier, but it is something that I spent many, many years doing and trying to do. And so it is part of my, in some ways, professional experience. And so now it is part of my introduction, but definitely those first few years in the professional world, I was still trying to figure out how do I introduce myself?
It's weird, right? Like you have to figure out what it looks like. And yeah, I can totally understand that. And I'm glad you mentioned it. Once you actually entered the workforce, and you were a consultant at Deloitte, what were those initial shocks or challenges that you experienced? And were there moments where you were like, is this for me? Can I do this? Who am I? Like you still had that identity crisis come up. And yeah, how did you navigate through that?
I mean, it was a big shift. So going from within a couple years training and skating, and I managed my schedule. I knew my goal, what my goal was what I was trying to get to. And so it was, I need to be on the ice for this much time. I'm doing off ice. I'm doing gym time, Pilates, ballet, there was all this kind of stuff that I was directly managing my training. And then going to an environment where you sit at a computer for many hours a day. I was in the technical side, I was in Excel and PowerPoint and in these tools that I didn't really have a lot of experience with yet. And so there definitely was a big shift of going from, even if I was working the equivalent amount of time to being a skater, it was just a very different way of working, of being in front of a computer, being in client meetings, being in a professional environment. So there definitely was a big learning curve for me going from one extreme of skating to the workforce.
even looking back at your professional career, at least like in the workforce, did you have people that you leaned on that almost gave you that sense of mentorship or of like, this is what you should optimize for when you're looking for in a job, when you're evaluating a company? Did you have that, or was it more just almost intuition or instinct or things that you were kind of asking yourself?
It was a lot of exploring. So it was not, when I was graduating college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I thought consulting would be interesting to start to see a lot of different businesses and industries. And it was a great first experience for me, because I definitely went into the deep end of building models and presentations and all that stuff. But I would say as my career has grown, I definitely have a little bit more people to reach out to for questions or mentorship type of things. But as a recent grad, I think that was definitely not a skill that or a strength that I had, I would say, where I had met a lot of people, but I wasn't really in a space or knew how to kind of translate that into a mentorship or an advising type of relationship. And so as my career has grown and as I've worked over the last 10, 12 years, now have quite a few folks that I now reach out to, whether it's for advice or for questions or as they say, like building your team around you. And as an athlete, my team was my coach and my choreographer and, my ballet teacher and my Pilates teacher. And now it's much more of all right, my team around me is people in my life, but then also my team of advisors, which I don't call them that, but in my mind, that's what they're doing.
Yeah. And throughout that process as well, you've been leader, manager in business operations, strategy, product marketing, all these different roles. I'm wondering, what skills, tangible skills, do you actually see transfer over from your time as a competitive athlete that actually really give you strength and positives going into a leadership role in tech and tech at these, really well-known big companies too?
Yeah, I think there is like two sides of this. I think there's one side of those like skills where it's, if you think about an athlete, your hard work, you're setting goals, you're overcoming obstacles, you're kind of doing a lot of the things that would translate into a working environment. But I think there's also this like more of experience side where, so like I said, from skating, learning how important your mindset is, learning about taking like accountability. So when I had mentioned around when I had this change, watching my sister win, thinking I want to do that. All right, now I'm gonna have to take accountability for my skating career. I think something like that is really translates into the workforce. Also, just like I'd mentioned before too, where I had meningitis going into the Olympic season, where I had a plan and a goal, and then it was gone, had to have a new plan. And so something like that, where your plan, you can have a plan and it's great to have a plan, but it's never going to go to plan. And so being able to shift and adapt has been huge too, off of the ice. And then another piece I would say is playing to win in a way, but that maybe that translates to working too. But yeah, when I was skating, I'm also the World Junior bronze medalist. And so that year was the year where they changed the judging system. And so I went into the competition with one program and it didn't get the points that I thought it would. And so I changed the whole program 2 days later to be able to get the points that I thought I could get. And this was a program where I had practiced for 8 months before, every day, same program over and over. And then within 2 days decided if I wanted to get a medal, I had to change it. Ended up getting a bronze medal. And so I think like things like that, where you have to be adaptable, you're overcoming obstacles, you're taking ownership and accountability. I think a lot of those things are maybe not hard skills, but things that you are experiencing that would translate into every aspect of your life.
That's, by the way, a crazy story, right? Is there are moments where things aren't in your control, right? And you have to adapt to that. Mm-hmm. And you touched on a little bit, but how have you dealt with just confidence as a whole and self-confidence? And what have you done? What tips do you use to give yourself that confidence? And even more so, have there been moments in your professional career where your confidence is maybe, kind of at the ground? And how do you bring yourself out of that?
I like to think that everyone goes through this too, but there are definitely times when I'm, what's the right term? Imposter syndrome, like thinking about, am I the person that's really doing this or in this role or with this, whatever it may be, where I'm, presenting in front of some very senior person or in front of a group of people or, so there are definitely times when I feel, the imposter syndrome, what is my confidence level? And I sometimes will think back to how did I navigate this in a competition or how did I think about this when I went to the Olympics? And sometimes I even think, okay, I competed at the Olympics, I could do this. And it's, and it's kind of this thing of, okay, I've done something hard in my life and I've done something that took a lot of work and was very difficult. It's like, I could do this thing. And then it kind of does put it in perspective of, okay, this is something I can accomplish. But there are definitely a lot of times when, my confidence is not 100%.
I love that you said that because it made me think my personal one, and I've done this a lot, where the fitness tests we ran for Stanford, I would just be like, I did that. Nothing is as painful as
there
that.
You go.
We're fine.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that. That's great.
And everyone's going to have their thing that they're going to look back on and say, okay, I did this hard thing. I can do this next hard thing.
Right. And it's also almost rewiring your brain to, you have nerves before, but like the nerves are good. Like that's a good sign. Yeah. You're doing something that's, a little uncomfortable, but you're probably going to grow from that. So it's essentially good.
Totally.
Tell me a little bit about Grandstand, where you are today. What attracted you to this company, and even more so about a startup environment too? That's different than what you did previously.
Even through my professional career early on, when I wasn't focused only on sports, I always was involved with sports in some way. I wouldn't say side project or hobby, but it was more of trying to keep involved with something that I was passionate about and really enjoyed. And that was being an athlete. And so I tried to find ways to be involved with figure skating or with sports in general, kind of thinking, well, I should start to work in sports. And then I came to a point recently where I have done a lot with women's sports and women in sports. And so I'm excited about opportunities where I can help support athletes who haven't historically had a lot of economic opportunity to grow that and to have economic opportunity. And so with Grandstand, it's a startup, very new, but it's an interesting space where it's an opportunity for athletes to have a revenue stream.
It's amazing as well because it's also this aspect where you leaving figure skating, or at least retiring, it didn't mean that you had to just close that box forever. Like there's a lot of, the world of sports is only increasing, and there's a lot in it that you're able to still, take that passion of yours and implement it in a different capacity, in a different role. So I think that's so cool. And I think a lot of athletes can see that value where their passions are still coming through.
Yeah. And I think that it took a little time for me because when I stopped skating, I went a total 180, and I did not my professional career in consulting and wasn't really involved with skating at all. I had done some work with Deloitte when they were sponsoring the Olympic Committee and the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And so did a little bit of work there. And I did a year at the International Olympic Committee, which was really interesting to work in Switzerland. But majority of those first few years of my career were not focused on sports. And then, like you said, I just had so much passion I loved being an athlete and I loved being in sports. And so kind of found my way back there.
I love it. Emily, I'm so curious. How do you define success, and how has it changed for you over the past 10 years?
That's a really tough question. As an athlete, your success, and like we talked about before, like your identity is tied to being an athlete, and it's tied to your success. It's all just tied together. And so I think when I thought about success as an athlete, it was, can I medal at this competition or make the Olympic team or whatever it may be? And now I think of success a lot differently. I think that it's just thinking about thinking about my life and my family, and success definitely has not been as much of what are the external factors that are showing that I am quote unquote successful, but more of intrinsically, how can I feel like I am being successful as a mother, as a wife, as someone who's working at a startup, as someone who is trying to help support women in sports and whatever else I might be doing.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's also just the natural flow of life. Meanwhile, put in a little Olympic medal here and there, but I think it's so cool and it's so like interesting to hear. So my next question, if you had the power to assign a book to everyone on earth to read and understand, which book would you choose?
I don't think there's one book, because I feel like there's a book in different categories that I've really loved reading, or I'm also a big audiobook person, so I love listening to books, especially when the author reads them. One that you probably will not hear from anyone else is when I was 12, I was the subject of a book called I Am a Skater. It's a children's book. There was a series of books from Random House called the Young Dreamer series. They did I am a gymnast, I'm a ballerina, I'm a horseback rider. And so I was the skater. And it was a lot of fun. A photographer, Jane Feldman, came to different practices and shows. And I had done skated between periods at the Rangers game in Madison Square Garden. And so it's this picture book of me as a skater. So probably not the book you thought I was going to say, but I couldn't pick just one book. So I figured I'd pick that one.
That's great. And I want to take a look now. I'm excited. And my last question for you, Emily, is what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
This is also a really difficult one, because I think that something like being a skater is not, for me, it's not I think there's not like a lifetime of owning that craft. I love skating and I still skate, and it's like a hobby at this point. And I have an amazing community in skating. But I think that to change it a little bit, as we're talking about mindset shifts, I would say that not a craft, but for me, my community is really important, and building fostering a community. And so I moved to San Francisco, didn't really know many people. My family wasn't there. And we were there for almost 7 years and felt like we really built this amazing community out there. And so now moving back to New York, just realizing as our lives change and we're moving and we're in different places, just thinking about my community. And it's not a craft, but it's something that I think is really important, especially, as they say, like it takes a village to raise a child. It's that community that's around you is really important. And it's family, but also beyond family. And so for me, community.
I love it. I think that's so important. And just the people around you, I think, is such an important factor. So I'll take it. I'll accept that answer.
What about, I want to hear about you, your craft. What is your craft you're spending a lifetime honing?
I think the book one is an easier one for me. Let's see.
Okay, the book.
One thing I will say about the book, though, that also got me thinking is I read a book called Mind Gym, and it was something that really helped me from the mental side of sports, but it really is so applicable to outside. And I haven't read it in a while, and it brought me back to that moment where I'm like, ooh, I need to go back and read Mind Gym. But right now I'm in my total like fictional era where I can suggest, Taylor Jenkins Reid and all these different incredible books. But I think I agree with you in that there's like so many different ones. But I love that. That's great. Well, awesome. Emily, it's been such an honor having you on this podcast. I've loved talking to you, really, to hear your story from competing at the absolute highest level in your sport and then having that transition to where you are today. It's been incredible. So thank you. Thank you for coming on She Leads.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to chat.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is at SheLeadsShow, and mine is at Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.